you. Thank you very much and welcome. I'm Father Mitch Packel. Welcome to Threshold of Hope, where we take a look at the writings of the church. Want to, first of all, extend, hopes that you've had a wonderful Christmas and that you're looking forward to a very good and holy New Year's celebration. But also want to mention that today is the feast of St. Thomas of Becket. He was born in 1118 and was eventually chosen by the King of England to be the Archbishop of Canterbury because he and the King had been very good friends. However, he wasn't the kind of friend the King wanted. The King wanted a bishop that would go along with anything he said, even when it went against some of the rights of the church. And so as a result, St. Thomas had to be exiled to France, and he came back in great triumph. But in 1170, the king said, "Who will rid me of this priest?" And a couple soldiers went and killed him at the cathedral. It's a famous play, Murder in the Cathedral, and a movie, Becket, was made about that too. It's a marvelously done movie. I enjoyed that. He died in 1170, and interestingly enough, the two men who killed him were, they confessed their sin, and their penance was to go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land, where I just was. And they are buried right underneath the so-called Golden Gate. On the east side, there's a cemetery there, and they're both buried right up against the wall where they died from disease and stuff. It's a tough trip in those days. It's, can be tiring enough even with an airplane. They had to take ships and walk and things like that. So, all right, we are continuing on with Veritatis Splendor. And you can get a paperback copy to follow along with us from EWTN's Religious Catalog. Just go to EWTNRC.com, or you can call them 24/7 at 1-800-854-6316. If you prefer, you can download a free electronic copy of Veritatis Splendor by going to the document library of our website, which is EWTN.com, and download it into your computer. Just type in Veritatis Splendor, and you'll be able to either print it out yourself or read from your computer with us. We'd like to have that go on. Now, of course, we'd love to have you be involved and participate in the show. You can come right here to beautiful Irondale, Alabama, and be part of our audience. Or you can send us a question through email by writing to threshold@ewtn.com. All right. We took a little break, from Christmas, but we're back to it here, I think. And we are on paragraph 62, which is entitled, Seeking What is True and Good. Now, that is going to be a key theme for understanding conscience, seeking what is true and good. Now, we've said in previous episodes, as we went through these earlier sections, that conscience is the judgment of an act, but it is not exempt from the possibility of error. Now, that's something we haven't talked about. The conscience makes errors. And this is something that is very much taught by the church. If you look at the Vatican II document, Gaudium et Spes, which is the Constitution of the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, paragraph 16, it says, conscience frequently errs from invincible ignorance without losing its dignity. The same cannot be said for a man who cares but little for truth and goodness, or for a conscience which by degrees grows practically sightless as the result of habitual sin. Now, let's take a look at that. This is very, very important. You can make a mistake with your conscience. Why? Think back on how frequently we have explained that conscience is a function of the reason. You have to think about right and wrong. And presumably, we do our best. But any of you who have raised little children know that they are trying to be good. Well, when they are trying to be good, like right before Christmas, then they come up with their little solutions to moral problems that because they are really trying to be good, those solutions are cute, but not correct. They'll come up with why and it's very interesting to let them explain their little reasoning. Well, I did this, Mommy, because I always knew that you did this and this, and therefore I said, okay, we'll do this, okay? It's like the little kid who goes to Louisiana. Joe got some folks here from Louisiana. This guy, Boudreaux, is over on his porch, and his little grandson says, "Oh, Peepaw, go ahead and make like a frog." And he said, "What are you talking about, boy?" He said, "Make like a frog." "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, Mama said that as soon as you croak, we get to go to Disney World." Now, that's a little kid's sense of how to come to a good moral conclusion going to see Disney World. But, he has... his steps of logic are not all that good because he doesn't know enough, okay? So this is something that, any one of us can do, especially as we move beyond trying to get to an amusement park over to thinking about very complicated moral issues. Some issues are tough. So it's possible. But even when we make a mistake, like the little kid, he's just trying to get to a certain point, and he's trying to get what he understands to be the criteria for getting over to an amusement park. Make Grandpa croak. But he thinks it's croak like a frog, doesn't know enough about croaking. So this is something that he still has the dignity of a good conscience. But he doesn't know enough, and he's still wrong. It's still incorrect. And it would be an incorrect solution to ask your grandfather to die, and so you can go to an amusement park. He doesn't understand that. He just takes that on another level. I mean, you grow up in South Louisiana, you go looking for frogs to gig them. You don't go trying to have anybody die from them. So that's one of the things. And then you have some people who don't even try to find out. I'll never forget a man who told me, "I don't want to read the Bible. I might find out that the things I'm doing are a sin. Now I'm ignorant." Well, actually, you are culpable for that ignorance. If you are ignorant on purpose and you don't like the truth, then you are culpable. Give you another example. I'll never forget a woman I met at the airport in Denver, and you have to go from the terminals on these little trains, and we're waiting there, and she asked me, she was very anti-Catholic, and said something about salvation. I said, "Well, ma'am, do you believe that baptism saves you?" She said, "No way. It's just faith alone, by grace alone." And I said, "But ma'am, if I show you in the Bible that it says baptism now saves you, would you accept it?" "No, I would not." At which point I said, "Then this conversation is over because you don't care what the truth might be." And in fact, it's in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 20. So, but be that as it may, it is very important to to love the truth. And also, as he says here, be careful, because sin, especially if you keep sinning, you can make yourself blind to your own sin. You justify it. That is exactly what goes on in culture. People begin to justify their sins, often by its repetition. Whether it be everybody else is doing it, or this is something that is right. The classic examples are in the 20th century. How many times did governments commit mass murder against their own people? And the people doing it, well, as a matter of fact, in World War II, they were first shooting Jews and putting them into mass graves. The soldiers got so upset and started committing suicide. That's when they came up with the gas chambers to deaden the conscience. But you can deaden your conscience because you are accustomed to sin and become blind to sin. So the council sums up the doctrine that the church has taught down the centuries with regard to an erroneous conscience. Consciences can make mistakes. Okay? Certainly, in order to have what St. Paul told Timothy is a good conscience, where he says in 1 Timothy 1 verse 5, the aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and sincere faith. So that's a goal. The Bible makes it a goal to have a good conscience. But to have such a good conscience, man must seek the truth. That has to be your number one care. Even if you have falsehoods that you believe, just like that little boy, he thinks that croaking has to do with making noises like a frog. Once he finds out that that's also an idiom that means die, he says, oh no, Grandpa, don't die. I'm sure that he loved his grandpa, so he would never want that. And he can correct his badly formed mentality, or poorly formed. But you have to seek the truth and find out what the truth might mean, and then make judgments in accord with that same truth. St. Paul says in Romans chapter 9, verse 1, I am speaking the truth in Christ. I am not lying. My conscience bears me witness in the Holy Spirit that I have great sorrow and unceasing anguish in my heart. So that's key for him, that the Holy Spirit confirms they have a good conscience. And that it must be a clear conscience, as we see in 2 Timothy 1:3, where St. Paul said, I thank God whom I serve with a clear conscience, as did my fathers, when I remember you constantly in my prayers. So having a clear conscience is a good thing. And as we also see in 2 Corinthians verses 4, where chapter 4, verse 2, it says, we have renounced disgraceful, underhanded ways. We refuse to practice cunning or to tamper with God's word, but by the open statement of the truth, we would commend ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. So we don't tamper with the truth. We don't try to change it or make it something other than it is. And then St. Paul also says to us in this regard, and this is especially true in our time. It's true in all times in history, but it's particularly true in ours. In Romans chapter 12, verse 2, where he says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may prove what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Pay attention to that. What is going on in this culture, in other cultures, is not the norm. We judge the things going on in the culture by the goodness that comes from God. And we don't judge God's goodness by the culture. Cultures change, so we accept that people will live together before they get married. Culture has changed, and people are living together before they get married. But we do not accept that as good and true. A man must make his commitment to his woman, and his woman must make her commitment to her man. In holy matrimony, by which the grace of Jesus Christ comes into the relationship. And it's not about, well, it's not convenient for us financially right now. Don't worry about that. Worry more about whether it's convenient to end up going to hell. That's never convenient, right? So don't do that. We don't conform to this world. And again, always you take this part of forming your conscience, you take a look. What does that lead to? What's going on in our culture? Has that led to people having fewer sexually transmitted diseases? Oh no, just the opposite. 20% are infected. Has it led to happier kids? No. You know that almost half the kids are born out of wedlock, and it leads to one catastrophe after another. They don't finish high school, they use drugs more often, they become unmarried parents, and they're poor. And again, remember, 80% of the people in prison are from such children, born out of wedlock. They don't know any better. Oftentimes, their conscience was not formed, but they learn very bad things from other people who are bad. This is why we don't conform to the world. We conform to God. Paul's admonition urges us to be watchful. Always watch, warning us that in the judgment of our conscience, the possibility of error is always present. I can always make a mistake. My conscience is not an infallible judge. It can make mistakes. I always have to be alert to myself with that. However, error of conscience can be the result of an invincible ignorance, and ignorance of which the subject is not aware, in which he is unable to overcome by him or herself. So you think about some of these kids born to unmarried parents. Where do they learn about the world? Other kids on the street. They tell them. And are their friends on the street the pillars of society? Usually not. And are they well-educated, brilliant young people? They might be brilliant. As a matter of fact, I've been in prisons, and I am very impressed with how intelligent the inmates are. When I go to the prison down in Texas, the inmates are brilliant. Their questions are great. But they needed to prison helped them to slow down. And then meeting some fine Catholic men. You remember we had Jimmy Reno and Jeremy Itz on my TV show a few years ago talking about that work. They meet these men who love Christ and love these men and love the church. And they can have their conscience formed, but the other guys in prison are not teaching them the faith until they get the faith themselves. And then when they do teach each other. Again, I'm also impressed with the men in prison who are doing teaching of others, but they needed help. And we can't overcome a badly formed conscience we might have had formed by thugs on the street. We didn't learn a lot of bad stuff by ourselves. We need help to overcome it. So the Vatican Council reminds us that in cases where the invincible ignorance is not culpable, it's not their fault. Remember Fagin in Oliver Twist, who was teaching young kids how to be pickpockets to survive. It's Fagin's fault, not the kids, especially not the little kids. Though the older they get, the more they realize it's wrong. But it is possible that ignorance is not culpable. It's not their fault. They were trained that way. But that doesn't mean that their conscience loses its dignity, because even when the conscience directs us to act in a way not in conformity with objective moral goodness and truth and justice, when the culture says, well, I thought I was supposed to steal. I remember one Jewish kid I knew back growing up, some Catholic guys took him to church with them. He wanted to see what we do at Mass. And they said, oh, they're going to pass a basket. And when they do, just grab what you need and leave the rest. Well, they were playing a joke on him. It was their fault to tell him such a thing. Not his at all. He was totally, without culpability. But then when he found out, everybody was looking at him, all the adults, and he put the money back, of course. And that these guys were the yahoos that taught him that. See, that's so that he was not culpable. But that doesn't mean his conscience loses his dignity. He thought he was doing something that everybody's supposed to do. Even when the conscience gets us to act in a way not in conformity with objective moral law, conscience continues to speak in the name of that truth about good, which the subject is called to seek sincerely. So all of us are called to seek goodness and truth. And even when we make mistakes, one of the great things about life and other people and the people of God is they help you to learn. So paragraph 63. In any event, it is always from the truth that the dignity of conscience derives. We said that a few weeks ago. That the conscience has its dignity because it is meant for the truth. Again, think of it. How many of you like being wrong? Do you like it? No. Do you like being lied to? No. Nobody likes being lied to. That itself indicates we are created for the truth. And in the case of a correct conscience, it is a question of objective truth received by man from God. God gives us the truth. In fact, Jesus says, I am the truth. He is ultimately the personification of truth. And in the case of an erroneous conscience, it is simply a question of what a man mistakenly, subjectively considers to be true. Like the little kid, as a little kid thought that croak meant make sounds like a frog. Okay? And that's all that he thought. And that's his mistake subjectively. It is never acceptable to confuse a subjective error, this error that I make because I don't know any better, or like the kid that took money out, that was a subjective error because he was taught incorrectly. It is never good to confuse subjective error about moral good with objective truth. Well, therefore, it is true for him. Well, it's kind of, but it's still not the objective truth. The objective truth is he passed the basket in order to, give money for the needs of the church and the poor. And so that's the objective reality. And once he found that, I said, oh yeah, he conformed himself to that objective reality. But this is something that we can never say, well, this is how I feel, so it must be true. No. What's true objectively is objectively true, not how you feel. So, and we have to make sure that the objective truth is rationally proposed to man in virtue of his end, that is, of his purpose. What is the purpose of man? So again, let's take a look at a very common situation. Well, I feel myself that it's okay if I live with my girlfriend before we get married, because we're going to get married anyway. That is like saying, well, I intend, a 15-year-old, I'm going to get my license as soon as I get my 16th birthday, but I feel I can drive without a license. Well, tell that to the judge. Because you're not going to get your license at 16 if that's your attitude, right? I mean, objectively, the 15-year-old is wrong. And so, because his goal is to have enough judgment and maturity and driving skills before he gets his license, not afterwards. And just because you are subjectively wrong, personally wrong, you cannot make the moral value of an act performed with a true and correct conscience equivalent to the moral value of an act performed by following the judgment of an erroneous conscience. In other words, you can't say that, well, my conscience was wrong. I didn't realize this was wrong, and therefore it's okay for me. No, you can't say it's the same. It's still, objectively, it's wrong. No matter if you, and again, I've had this happen to me. When I taught the 10 Commandments, my students would say, I didn't know that fornication was a sin. They honestly didn't know. Where are they going to hear it? In television sitcoms? No, I don't think so, because that's all that they see as totally normal on a date, that you commit fornication as part of a date. As I heard one college kid say when I was on campus, look, I spent $100 on dinner. I should at least get that. You see, sorry, bud, but she is not a commodity like the dinner. She is a human person with another dignity that doesn't come because you paid money. That's prostitution, which is also a mortal sin, objectively speaking. Even though you don't know that it's a mortal sin, it is. And so we can't say that my subjective mistake is morally good. It's not morally good. So, and St. Thomas, by the way, in his book, De Veritate, which means concerning the truth, question 17, answer 4, says on the same topic, it was said that a false conscience binds with reference to indifferent things, but not with reference to things which are intrinsically evil. On the contrary, St. Thomas says, a mistaken conscience is said not to bind when dealing with things that are intrinsically evil because the dictate of natural reason opposes it. But natural reason in like manner opposes the false conscience, which is mistaken about indifferent things. Therefore, that too does not bind. So when you make a mistake, that's not morally obligatory. You're not allowed to say, I didn't, I'll tell you the story in a second. It is possible that the evil done as a result of an invincible ignorance or a non-culpable error of judgment may not be imputable to the agent. That is, the person doing it may not be a sin for them because they don't know any better, in these things. But even in this case, it does not cease to be an evil, objectively speaking. It is still objectively morally wrong. It is still a disorder in relation to the truth about what is good, even though the person doing the act doesn't know that it's wrong. Furthermore, I'll tell the story now. There's a story about some of the bishops having their visit with the Pope. Every 5 years they have to meet with the Pope. And part of it with John Paul was to have lunch with him. And one of the bishops was supposed to have said to the Pope during lunch, Holiness, you have to understand, many of our young people are not culpable for committing fornication because they don't know that it's wrong. And the Pope said, these young people, they do not know, so they are not culpable. But a bishop who does not tell them that this is a sin, he is culpable. Everybody went back to their soup. Another side of this, though, a good act which is not recognized as being good You don't even realize that what you're doing is good. As such, does not contribute to the moral growth of the person who performs it. It does not perfect him. It does not help to dispose him for supreme good. Therefore, before feeling easily justified in the name of our conscience, we should reflect on the words of Psalm 19. Who can discern his errors? Clear me from hidden faults, says to God. I can't even discern my own errors. Sometimes I'm doing good. I didn't realize it was good. Sometimes I'm doing evil. I don't realize it's evil. I need God's help for this, to clear me my hidden faults. There are faults which we fail to see, but which nevertheless remain faults. And if you don't believe the Pope, and if you don't believe me, ask your spouse. They will tell you. Or ask your parents. They will tell you. They know that your fault is a fault, whether you do or don't. And that this fault remains because we refuse to walk toward the light. Again, he cites Jesus here in John 9, verses 39 to 41, when Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." Now, some people, he's talking about are the ones who have to learn what really is morally good or not. Some of the Pharisees heard this and they said to him, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains." So conscience, as the ultimate concrete judgment, compromises its dignity when it is erroneous on purpose. That's called culpable error. So when you're erroneous on purpose, that is to say, when man shows little concern for seeking what is true and good, as Gaudium et Spes, paragraph 16 says. Conscience frequently errs from invincible ignorance without losing its dignity, as we already talked about. The same cannot be said for a man who cares but little for truth and goodness, or for a conscience which by degrees grows practically sightless as a result of habitual sin. So Jesus alludes to this danger of having our conscience deformed when he says in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6, verse 22 to 23, "The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is sound, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is not sound, your whole body will be full of darkness. And if then the light in you is darkness, how great the darkness." If you don't try to seek the truth and form your conscience well, you are culpable for that. You are responsible for it. So our task is to seek the truth. Don't accept this baloney about relativism and say, well, everybody has their own truth. That is blinding us to virtue and goodness and truth. Don't ever give in to that nonsense, but seek the truth that comes from God. We're going to take a break, come back in a couple of minutes, and get some comments and questions. So please stay with us. Thank you. And, now Christmas season's coming to an end, and then we're going to have this coming weekend will be the first of the year, and you'll be traveling back. Well, if you're coming through this way, remember, we're not too far from the corner of I-20 and I-65. And we'd love to have you come here. If you can join us on our programs, please contact our pilgrimage department at 205-271-2966, or go to ewtn.com. They'll give information on the availability of live programs where you can be in the audience, or questions about places to stay, places to eat. It's not Lent yet, so you can certainly have some of our fine religiously themed restaurants. Hamburger Heaven. That's pretty good, right? And Golden Rule Barbecue. And, of course, get the fried green tomatoes right down at the Whistle Stop. So good to have y'all come, and they'll give you information on all that you need to know, including how to get up to Hansville to go visit the sisters. All right, we have a caller. Hello, Peter?
Yes, hello.
Hi, Peter. Where are you from?
I'm from Vicksburg, Michigan, Father.
Oh, great. Good. Good to have you. And what is your question?
My question is, Father, I feel in my heart with Mercy Sunday, or Mercy, the year of Mercy coming up, that I had a bad situation of going through divorce and trying to get annulment, and I had an annulment started, and the priest that I had was no longer in the priesthood. He was no longer a priest because of alcoholism, and they lost my papers.
Oh, no.
And everything. And I prayed to God over the whole situation, and I feel in my conscience as well as my heart that I should be able to receive communion. And I think if I could talk to the Pope, I think he would say the same thing. And I feel for the mercy of God, he's forgiving and loving. And I prayed about it, and I felt good about the whole situation.
Well, Peter, all right, Peter, let me just give a couple things to think about on that regard. You're right. We've already begun. It's not something that will be coming. We've already begun this year of mercy. Began on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And we do want mercy, and part of this process is that the Pope has asked that we expedite the situation with annulments. Now, I'm really sorry about the priest who was an alcoholic and that he's no longer in the ministry. I hope that he gets that straightened out, because it's tough thing to overcome, but it is worth overcoming. So pray for him. And whether it's related to his drinking or not, he lost your papers. Don't let that stop you from going ahead to get the annulment. That's not a good reason to avoid that process for a couple reasons. First and most importantly, the teaching that someone who is divorced cannot get remarried is not something that the church thought up in the Middle Ages or something. It is rather the teaching of Jesus Christ in the Sermon on the Mount. That is the bottom line issue. In Matthew chapter 5, and again in Matthew 19, and in the parallels in the other Gospels as well. Jesus tells us that a man or woman who's divorced cannot then remarry. Now, at the same time, one of the issues that the church does recognize as a minister of mercy is that in some situations, a couple may not have been validly married in the first place. That's what annulment is saying and recognizing. There was not enough present for the marriage to be a valid marriage. And that's why it's helpful, and not only in terms of procedure, but the process of the annulment has been, for many of the couples I know, part of their healing. A divorce is tough. Most of the people I know who have had a divorce compare it to an amputation. It's difficult, and we don't like to see that happen. And as with an amputation, there's a need for healing. And that the annulment process is meant to be part of the healing. And then what you are morally, objectively, obliged to do is to live chaste. If you're married together and you choose to live as brother and sister in a celibate way, then communion would be possible. That would be possible. But it still does not exempt you from going through the annulment process and then having your marriage convalidated. It sounds like rigmarole, but it's not. It's part of this process of healing that is very important and necessary. And it's also part of living the teachings of Jesus Christ. That is what is at stake. And that's what's very important here. And that's why we're concerned about it. All right. I have another caller. Hello, Yolanda?
Yes, good afternoon, Father Pacqua.
Hi, how are you? Where are you from?
Miami.
Great.
Yes, in reference to discernment, how can one know if you are feeling inspired by your own, say, attraction to do something, say, in a ministry, or if it's from the Holy Spirit? Is there any way to discern that?
Sure there is. The number of elements. And first of all, Yolanda, let me make as a general recommendation, one of the books that I wrote is called How to Listen When God is Speaking. And you'll see in that book some of the helps for discernment, okay? So that'll be a follow-up for you to do. And I urge others who are trying to discern the will of God, take a look at that book as a way to get some of the principles for discernment. Now, what I would say at this point, though, is, one, take a look at where certain attractions are and where certain things repulse. So, for instance, you said a ministry. You feel an attraction toward that ministry, all right? Then what you do is you start off doing some very small things in that ministry. Start off very small. I've only held 2 offices as a Jesuit in my order, okay? Only 2 offices. The first office I ever held was back in '69, in which I was the Prince of the Novitiate. You know what that meant? I was in charge of cleaning the throne room. And that's a very important part of preparing for the priesthood. That doing that simple things and doing the other tasks that I had. By the way, there's another guy who was in charge of me. He was the king. But you begin with these small things and see if that attraction remains with those small things. And if you continue to find peace as you continue along that line, then that is one of the indicators that you are being drawn by God. If it is an attraction to being famous. Not you, I don't know you, Yolanda, but I know some people who say, oh, I want to be a preacher. I want to have a healing ministry because then I'll get my own TV show. If that's what you want, it's going to destroy your soul. It'll destroy your soul. If God is leading you in something, not to get famous, not to have a TV show or anything like that, but because you want to serve God and his people, then he will give you a peace that lasts. If it is something from you, the peace may come, but also go. Excuse me. The peace won't stay with you, and you'll feel disoriented towards it. This is something that I think is very, very important to keep in mind. And then, of course, test it with the people who are in charge of that ministry. See if they confirm having you work with them. And if so, then follow it, okay? But again, take a look at that book. It'll give you a lot more to think about. All right, here we have an email. Father Mitch, could you explain the theological reasoning behind withholding First Holy Communion from a baptized infant in the Latin rite? If the parent's faith is what stands for the infant child at their baptism, why not extend that to First Holy Communion for them as well, as is similar to the Orthodox Church? Christopher in Pittsburgh. Well, Christopher, it's not only the Orthodox Church, it's also a number of the Byzantine rites in the Catholic Church. So, for instance, Melkites and other Byzantine rite Catholics, Greek Catholics as they're called, give First Communion at baptism. In fact, I don't know all the Eastern rites, but all the Eastern rites I know about give baptism to infants and chrismation, which is the Eastern word for confirmation. So they receive confirmation as infants, and many of them receive First Holy Communion at the same time. Just a little bit of the precious body and blood, okay, that they can, because they have a tough time swallowing. But and then they can receive communion as they go along. In the Latin rite, First Communion was not until you were 14 years old. It was Pius X, St. Pius X, who brought it down to age 7. And the idea was this: both confirmation and communion were something where you would be able to use the ability to reason before you received it. That was the reasoning. But as you say, the faith of the parents is what's behind small children receiving their First Communion and chrismation in the Eastern rites. And that is also something that would be possible. That would be possible, for us in the Western rite. There's nothing theologically absolutely against it. And I know that the bishops are really struggling with this question because now confirmation is treated as graduation from learning to be a Catholic. That's a mistake. It's a beginning of mission as a Catholic. That's the purpose of confirmation. But that's why they do it in high school, because if you do it earlier, then they won't come to classes. So it's only to keep them coming to classes. Then they stop coming, or the parents stop bringing them. So this is something that we have to really do a lot of evangelization and explanation of. We must train people that keep up your understanding of the faith with the understanding of everything else you do. I have another question called in. Hello, Alexander?
Father Pacwa.
Hi, Alexander. Where are you from?
Washington.
The city or the state?
The state, I'm sorry. Yes,
Oh, okay.
Spokane
Well,
Valley.
there's no need to be sorry for living in Washington. It is a beautiful state. Washington, D.C., that's something else. But Washington State, just kidding. Washington State is gorgeous. So what is your question?
Yeah, Yeah, I just caught your show that was speaking about God, speaking to our consciences, even to the natural law prior to be a Christian. I am not a Catholic yet, but I've been studying the Catechism, and it's the closest to the truth that I found after a lot of research. I'm struggling right now with trying to discern what is my conscience speaking to me, because I'm dealing with some extraordinary opposition, like diabolical things, and I was wondering how exactly can I recognize what my conscience is saying, how God's voice through it.
Okay, stay on a second, if you would. Is it a moral question that you're talking about?
Well, just guidance in general. Like I've gotten real stuck lately because I'm afraid I don't really know how I can trust to go, like where I can move. It's not just morality, but also, in seeking God and seeking the truth. And like I said, I'm closest to a Catholic now after a lot of research. I'm still not completely finished, but I'm very close to it. And that's why I'm asking you.
Okay, sure. Okay, a couple things. Doing the research that you're doing and studying to find out what is true. Is Catholicism true? Is exactly what you should be doing, because your conscience is oriented towards truth and not falsehood. It's not oriented towards propaganda. It's oriented towards objective truth, so that when you understand truth, you can start to make decisions based on that truth. That is exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And in fact, you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're on that path of investigating the claims of the church and the history of the church, the teachings of the church. That's exactly what you should be doing. Does that make sense? Maybe I lost it. All right. But at any rate, use that as a norm. And I'm going to also suggest something to you. I've heard I've studied lots of things over the years and such, and I've heard a lot of nonsensical things about Catholicism over the years. Things that you say, for instance, that a standard thing I've heard so often, that religion is the biggest cause of war in history. Everybody hears that, right? And you do the research and find out, that's not even true. 2.65 million people died in Christian wars in 2,000 years versus 305 million in 86 years of secular wars in the 20th century alone. So, you say, okay, find out the truth. And I'm going to tell you this. The more you find it, the more you say, it makes more and more sense as I go along. I'm going to also recommend to you the same book I mentioned earlier to Yolanda, How to Listen When God is Speaking. That will also be a very helpful guide to you in regard to how you do that discernment process, not only for choosing a personal decision, but also dealing with the objective realities. So that's what we have there. Let me take this one from Sharon. Father Paco, my son has Down syndrome and medical issues. We go to Mass on Sundays and holidays, follow the fasting and other laws of the church. If I miss Mass, he misses it. If I go to confession, he does not, because he can't do that. I really do not feel that my son has the use of reason. He's very innocent and childlike. Is he capable of sin as we know it? Sharon, I'm going to tell you a story about a young man I met with Down syndrome who was in his 20s down in Peru. And as I was meeting this family, I was working in Lima, and I was meeting this family, I said, this is my daughter, and this is my son. He's our saint. You're right. He doesn't have enough reason to think through how to be as bad as smart people know. That they can be smart and sin. He just is a sweet, loving person, and without that ability to think through the issues, he's not culpable and he's virtuous. And so you just consider yourself being blessed and walking around through life with a living saint. And someday we'll be seeking his intercession. All right, we're out of time, and Lord bless you and keep you, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and grant you a wonderful new year. And again, we still have a few more specials coming up, so please keep us in between your gas bill, electric bill, and cable bill, because we will have those bills as the New Year and Epiphany come up. Thank you, and God bless you.